Hey everyone. Uh, Today I have another deck tech for you guys. It's actually a deck tech that's been previously on my channel, but I had to re-upload it. There were a lot of rulings that I wasn't fully aware of, and now I like to think that I'm caught up to speed with everything. So without further ado, I have my Enchantress deck build. Uh, the Enchantress is a really strong avatar. This deck is very strong. Even when I was using the rulings incorrectly, it was really strong. But now that I understand the rulings, I think it's a little bit fairer to go up against. However, it has not lost any power at all. So for those of you who don't know what Enchantress does, it is an avatar that allows you to animate an aura whenever you cast a spell. And that's pretty good. So this deck's general idea is just to control the board state, get a lot of value off of its cards, and win the game by using the Enchantress's ability to animate your auras and use them to finish off the game. Going into our artifacts, we have a Philosopher Stone, Aquamarine Core, Amethyst Core, and Ruby Core. Just a mana acceleration for our elements. We're only playing three. We're not playing the Earth element. I feel like with the three, it's just right for everything for what this deck's trying to do. For our minions, we have 4 Apprentice Wizard Spellcaster, and it has Genesis. Whenever it enters play, you draw a spell. It's pretty good. Got 2 Selfsame Simulacrum. Essentially, this is in here just to copy your spellcasters, but it's also really good to copy other minions as well. We're playing 2 Grandmaster Wizard Spellcaster and Genesis. When it enters play, you draw 3 cards. Really strong stuff. And then for our big beater, we also have the Great Old One. This is really great to copy with Selfsame as well. This is the strongest minion in the game currently in terms of stats. It has Submerge and also has a Genesis ability to permanently flood the realm, including voids. It's pretty good. For those of you who don't know what flood means, flood essentially makes, well, for this particular instance, it floods the entire realm, so all sites that are in play just get a water threshold, and they're treated as a water site. If it's already a water site, it doesn't get the extra threshold. And for the void, essentially will flood that as well. You can't use the mana for it, but it's necessary for other cards in this deck. So for our spells, we have 4 Lightning Bolt. Love Lightning Bolt, gotta play it. If you're playing air anyways. For 2 mana, being able to deal 3 damage to a random unit at a target location is really good. Most of the time, if there's only 1 unit at that location, you're guaranteed to deal the 3 damage. And this is really good for finishing off the game if your opponent's on death's door. And of course, there's no other units in that location that their avatar is in. You can just finish off the game as such. So I have 4 Minor Explosion. I wasn't sure if I included this in my previous list, but this is a new addition either way. For 3 mana, being able to deal 3 damage to each unit at target location up to 2 steps away. It's pretty good. For 1 mana more, it does a little bit more of a better job than Lightning Bolt, because if your opponent has multiple minions, you can use this to just clear them all out. And of course, if their avatars there, you can deal 3 damage as well. And that's necessarily why we have the spellcasters, because they just allow us to cast these spells a little bit closer to our targets. We have Stormy Seas. This card's so good. If you guys have seen my Elementalist build, you know that I play 3 Cave-In, and 3 Stormy Seas is essentially the same thing as Cave-In. The only difference is that instead of burrowing all minions and artifacts, it submerges all minions and all artifacts. Pretty good. Most of the time, your opponent will have all these artifacts under their avatar, like Philosopher Stone, cores, or any equipments or weapons, and this can just submerge all of them. It doesn't necessarily put them in a graveyard, it just places them under the site, giving them a chance to get them back. But if they don't have Submerge or any minions that could be summoned to the bottom of a site, more than likely they're not going to be able to get it back. We have 3 Poison Nova. This deck has a lot of late game cards and a lot of cards that cost high mana. So Poison Nova is really good for aggro decks, especially if your opponent's like really pushing their minions towards your avatar. This is just so you can clear them out completely. And that's it for the spells. I took out Dream Quest, and I took out Pact with the Devil. I feel like I want to play Pact with the Devil again and maybe take out a Minor Explosion. However, I feel like the Minor Explosions have just been so good at finishing off the game and just making the game a little bit quicker. Dream Quest, a lot of people probably don't know, but they changed the ruling on it where avatars cannot be disabled, so you can't use Dream Quest on an avatar, which is okay. And this deck plays a lot of spellcasters. However, they're not really good at staying in play. So Dream Quest is a hit or miss. If you want to play that, you can. I don't think that you will need to. So for the auras, we're playing 2 Silence. So this is actually, I think, going to be the main aura in the deck, and I'll go in depth with that later. But essentially what Silence is an aura that any minions in the affected sites of Silence, their effects are negated. Essentially, just forget their text box. They can move, they can still attack, they can do those basic abilities, but they cannot activate anything in their text box. We're playing 2 Flood. The affected sites that Flood is affecting, they become water sites. Just like the name, it basically floods the sites. You turn them into water sites and they get their water thresholds. And the reason why this is actually in here is just so our Stormy Seas can get better targets. You see, you can't submerge a minion if they're on a land site, so you have to submerge them, obviously, if they're on a water site. So Flood allows you to flood your opponent's sites so that way you can submerge them. Now, for the main win conditions of the deck, we have 3 Wildfire and 3 Thunderstorm. So these were the cards that I actually needed to refresh myself on, because Wildfire here, you summon it on a single site, and at the end of each turn you deal 3 damage to each unit at that site, and then you can move Wildfire. So when you make this a minion, and for whatever reason it takes, like, let's say it took 1 damage, at the end of the turn, this is going to kill itself, because it deals 3 damage to each unit at that location. When you make this a minion, it becomes, a unit target, so then it's going to take damage. So it could potentially kill itself. You have to be very careful. This is, most of the time when you animate your auras, I think that they intended it to have a downside when you do that, and that's why these cards can potentially destroy themselves. Even Thunderstorm, so it'll affect multiple sites because you put it on a corner. This just goes on 1. But Thunderstorm says at the end of the turn, you deal 3 damage to a random unit that's on the affected sites, and then afterwards you get to move Thunderstorm 1 space. And if you do, once this is dealt 3, this is done damage 3 times, you dispel it. So, for those of you who don't know how auras move, I'll explain it to you. So let's say, like, these 2 sites are mine, these 2 sites are my opponent's. So Thunderstorm can be conjured up to any of the corners of your sites. So potentially you can have it set up like this. When you animate it, because of the Enchantress, essentially what will happen is this. If, let's say, we have a bigger board here, right? So these 2 are my sites, these 4 are my opponent's sites. When I make this a minion, and if I declare it to attack, it's going to move like so. I originally thought that you have to move it within one of the 4 squares, but that's not correct. This is treated as if it's the size of, like, it's big enough to surround 4 sites, basically. So if I'm moving it, it's going to move as if it's, affecting 4 sites again. So that's really it. I hope that explained how those work. Certain auras, like Wildfire, they're summoned on 1 site, so you only have to move them like, how a regular minion would move. However, the majority of all the other auras are able to move as if they're in multiple sites. And that's really good. Now, again, the downside is that at the end phase of the turn, if this is a minion, Thunderstorm is going to deal 3 damage to it if it's the only minion. Of course, it does it to a random minion, so if there's another minion in either of those 4 sites that it's affecting, it could potentially hit that. But let's say, for instance, this attacked one of my opponent's minions and it took 1 damage. If this is the only minion at either of its locations, it's going to deal 3 damage to itself and then it's going to die. It's very unfortunate. Also, you have to be very careful with this, because if this attacks a minion, it has dealt damage. So it'll be treated as if it dealt damage. So if it attacks 3 minions, it's going to disable itself or dispel itself. There is hope, though. You see, I found a little trick to get around these little issues here. So if you use the auras to attack sites, your opponent loses life and it is not damage. So that means that if you're using this to attack your opponent's sites, it's never going to be treated as if it dealt damage. So that means this won't be dispelled. However, of course, if its effect manages to deal damage to a minion, then of course it will actually be treated as such. But another thing that we have here is silence. The thing about silence is that it negates the text box of all minions. So if you made this a minion with silence being in the same region, and if you use this to attack a minion, its effect is negated, so it's not going to be treated as if it dealt 3 damage, and it won't be dispelled because, of course, its effect is negated. And that's really good too, because this just essentially just makes this a 4-power minion with no effect, and the whole point of us making this a minion is just so we can deal damage or drain our opponent's life. So with silence, it's kind of a good way to protect these auras from killing themselves. And yeah, it's a very nice little unique attack tactic, I guess. But yeah, so that's how auras move. That's how you can use silence to protect those powerful auras. And Wildfire and Thunderstorm are in the deck that just aggro your opponent out and deal as much damage as they possibly can. So the other 2 auras, we have 2 Abundance and 1 Atlantean Fate. Abundance is an interesting card because I found out that this actually works on your opponent's sites if you're not careful. Because what this does is each affected site provides 1 additional mana. And that's great if you have it on your side of the field because you're just generating mana. However, if you make it a minion and if you attack, and if it's closer to your opponent's sites, this affects your opponent's sites and they'll get extra mana. So be very cautious about that. Of course, if you have silence nearby, you never have to worry about that, because you can just attack freely and not have to worry about this giving your opponent extra mana. Atlantean Fate. This card's really strong. I'm really glad that this is a unique, because, again, if it was anything other than a unique, I'd flip out. So this card says, affected non-ordinary sites are flooded. They're water sites, and they provide a water threshold, and they lose all other abilities. So this card actually explains thoroughly what flooded is, all except for the lose abilities part. Of course, they'll turn it into water sites, they'll provide the water threshold, but it's just an additional effect that they lose all effects. So this is a Smokestacks of Gnaak in an aura form, and also has a really strong Genesis ability. So it submerges all minions and artifacts on top of affected sites. So essentially, once you play this, if any of your opponent's minions or artifacts are in the affected sites of Atlantean Fate, they're submerged. Very strong. And also, you can make this a minion with Enchantress. And yeah, that's a lot of effects. It's a really strong card. Now, I would say there is a little downside of this card, and it is a little interesting because I actually had my opponent use a Selfsame Simulacrum to copy this when it became a minion. And so what ends up happening is when this comes in play, and of course this is a minion, this is declaring this as its copy. When it enters play, it'll come in play as a copy of Atlantean Fate in its aura form. And then of course it'll have its Genesis ability to submerge everything in the affected areas. So since this is a minion, this will get submerged. And since this is an aura, when it enters play, it will not get submerged. So, little tiny weakness with Atlantean Fate. If it happens to be a minion, it can die like a minion. Enough said. But neat little interaction there, and that's why Selfsame Simulacrum is pretty interesting, especially in this deck, because you can copy the auras that you have as your minions. It will come and play as an aura, but you will at least get an extra aura to, strategize with, if you will. So that's it for the deck. Last thing I have is just the Atlas, and I mean, it's basically going to be generic. So we have Smokestacks of Gnaak, the site that just negates all other sites' abilities. Mirror Realm being able to come and play as a copy of any nearby site. And then we have 2 Sinkhole. Sinkhole's just really strong, being able to finish off the game fairly easily if your opponent's not careful with their mana base. You can use Sinkhole because it's a site. It provides mana as soon as it comes in play. And then when you sacrifice Sinkhole, you can destroy a nearby site. And that could be really strong if you destroy the right site. And Mirror Realm just kind of almost copies Sinkhole, so it could potentially be a third Sinkhole target in your deck. And it just gets out of hand pretty quick. We've got an Observatory. It has a Genesis ability where it enters play, you look at your next 3 spells, and you put them back in any order. Then we have 2 Floodplain. We play Floodplain because, of course, we want to turn our enemies' sites into water sites. And this is really good for doing that, because once per turn, you may flood an adjacent site to this one. And it's really good because if you're trying to play the Stormy Seas, you can flood a site and then immediately Stormy Seas whatever was on that site. So we have 3 Lighthouse, 3 Oasis, 3 Ruins. Just enough said about these. These are the dual sites, and they just allow us to fix our mana for our elements. Last 4 sites of the deck. We have 1 of each of the towers. Some people play multiple copies. I think that if you just have 1 of each, you're always going to guarantee that when this comes in play, you get an additional mana. And of course, if you guys don't know what this does, Genesis, if this is the only copy of this certain tower in play, you add 1 additional mana this turn. So it's pretty good. If you start the game off with 1 site and on turn 2 you play 1 of these towers, you now have 3 mana, and that could potentially put you in the lead. If you have an Apprentice Wizard, you could just play that on the first turn, and it's really strong. So we have Autumn River here is our last land. Genesis, you look at your next spell, and then you get to choose to put it on top or bottom. And of course, being a water site could be pretty crucial. So yeah, that's it for the Enchantress deck. I hope I explained that a little bit better than last time, and I hope that I covered up a bit of how these auras are supposed to interact. Also, sorry if I flew through the video a little bit quicker this time. I'm trying to just minimize my timing for recording. But anyways, I hope you liked this video in deck tech. Comment, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one.